Hello and welcome back to the tongue-in-cheekily titled The Institute of Pop, where I know nothing about nothing, but the double negative probably means I know something, as Steve Martin once said, which is just enough to screw me up for the rest of my life. And this is where I record, release and discuss music of all shapes and sizes. And today we're going to start with looking at the Church Mark I. And the reason I say Mark I is because this is the band that released this album. This was the Church's debut album from 1981. It was co-produced by Chris Kilbey and Bob Clearmountain, and it positioned them very firmly in the genres of post-punk, power pop and new wave. And while I bought the album when it first came out, one of my first exposures to it was through this compilation, 1981 Rocks On, and you can just see them right down there. And think of all the bands that they were hanging out with. There was Kim Wilde, Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, Ultravox, and even Mental as Anything got a Guernsey. And it was a really wonderful period of time in 1981 for music because let's face it, the 80s had just begun, everything was brighter, more colourful, more poppier, and here come the Church bursting out of the gates with the opening track, For a Moment We're Strangers. 12 and 6-string guitars becoming their trademark immediately, and it's just a guitar assault. Wonderful backing vocals, echoing in the backing vocals. And I really loved the complexity of these chord changes to produce what seemed like a simple pop song. One of the life-saving moments during the COVID period for me was seeing Steve Kilbey's Instagram concerts every week. And when he played these songs, particularly For a Moment We're Strangers, I couldn't believe how complex the chord changes were. It's a brilliant pop song, and one that is befitting of the opening of a great album. Following up on that is Chrome Injury, one of my personal favourites, and I keep using the word rock here because the Church never rocked harder than on this album. I don't know if I ever got the opportunity to see this song played live back in the 80s. I would have loved to have seen it done, but it absolutely blows me away that this song was cut from many of the overseas pressings when the album was reissued in 1982. Tragic. And that takes us to the next song, The Unguarded Moment, probably their biggest hit in terms of chart success in Australia, with that ubiquitous Beatle-esque riff that opens up the song, which was everywhere in Australia in 1981 and is still a staple of their live shows today. They must be sick of playing it, but then again, we've got to support those who support us. And I really recommend to you, there's this video on YouTube called Steve Kilbey, A Lesson in Unguarded Moment, where he tests the audience in a sing-along as to whether they do know the words, and they fail, as did I, absolutely miserably. Still, it's a rock classic, and it's a brilliant song, so we don't need to say too much more about that. We move then on to Memories in Future Tense, and this is a real sort of post-punk, edgy, new wave song, which is unlike anything they ever recorded. I mean, if you check after the second chorus, there's a funk breakdown in there, for God's sake. Great backing vocals, very different to everything that's ever been played, as I said, but I wonder whether I would have taken Fighter Pilot off the subsequent Church pressings at the expense of this one. And after that, we go on to one, for me, the highlights of the album, Bel-Air. It's such a beautiful song with the, I hope or assume, Rickenbacker arpeggios, the liquid guitar lines of Peter Koppes, the gorgeous vocals of Steve Kilbey, and it really is the first signs of a bridge that is being built from Church Mark I to Church Mark II. I sometimes think that this is, the palm tree nodded at me last night. I could imagine this being used in the soundtrack to an episode of Miami Vice from the 80s, with Don Johnson and that other guy walking around looking cool in their shades as this song played by some poolside in Beverly Hills. Or maybe that's just something that I dreamt up, or maybe it actually did happen. Let me know if it did. We might just struggle to find a Church fan whose favourite song in this album is not the next one, Is This Where You Live? From that haunting sound that begins, the vocoder. I mean, who had a vocoder hanging around in their bedroom back in 1981? Steve did, and he puts it to good use. Well, they put it to good use here. Then you have those harmonics on the bass, the 12-string arpeggios, the sultry voice of Kilbey echoing the surrealist, ethereal lyrics, and that's just the start of the song. We move on there to a beautiful pummeling into submission of the audience. And I love Nick Ward's drum fills, and a special mention must go to that incredible reverse guitar solo by Pete. This is, to this day, one of the great songs that the Church do live. And they take it from the 8 minutes or so of the version of Skins and Hearts way out there now, until they really have reduced us into submission, as I said, so we're bowing down and kneeling before the Church and worshipping at their altar. It is one of the greatest epic church songs of all time. Hell, it's one of the great church songs of all time. And so Is This Where You Live takes us on a journey into the psychedelic realm, which would again provide another step on the bridge to the Church Mark II. But we're ripped out of that world very quickly on the next song on side B, which is She Never Said, which I think is a great new wave pop song, and it gets unfairly dismissed. I don't think the band really liked it that much, but it kicks. It's a cool song with a great chorus, and it's crunchy, memorable lyrics. I don't know if you can have crunchy, memorable lyrics, but maybe there's a crunchy tone. And a lot of that crunch sound comes from the gated snare, or is it an electronic drum snare that's used throughout the song by Nick Ward. Maybe that's what roots it back in the early 80s. But let's face it, it's not the only church song or church album that has received some negative press because of that gated drum sound. Here, though, I think it works really well. And is that a little bit of Marty wigging out with some feedback and some electric guitar explorations, which would soon become a vital part of the church guitar palette? I think this song has a lot more to offer than we first anticipate or appreciate even in hindsight. The next song is Fighter Pilot Korean War, a song that is cropped from all subsequent releases, and I think unfairly so, because the Church have never rocked out more than on this song, and this was the Church Mark I. You needed to rock out in Australian pubs back in 1981 if you didn't want to have bottles thrown at you. And we go from the propulsiveness of that verse and those chugging guitars into a gorgeous melody. The complexity of the chord changes really elevate this beyond just a Oz rock pub song. I would have loved to have been there in 1981 to have heard this, to see what it sounded like. Or maybe I would have had to hear what it sounded like. I think you know what I'm trying to say. But it's one that will never be played again, I think, because it's been disowned. But I'd love to see it in concert. And I'd love to see it and hear it in concert. And I'd like to get on to the next song now, which is Don't Open the Door to Strangers. And here comes the piano and the acoustic guitar. I think they've been virtually absent on this album, but they're giving us another sense of what it's like to start moving across that bridge to the Church Mark II. Daunting vocals about paranoia, and it really sets up the Blurred Crusade to have these short, quiet, introspective and alienated pieces at the end of sides of music. It might have been more traditional to end this album with Is This Where You Live, but no, it's a quiet chance for us to reminisce and to contemplate at the end of this side of music. So that's the end of Skins and Heart, and as I hold up my fairly grubby looking copy of the album, there's an interesting story to that. Of course, I had the album when it came out in 1981, and then, like all of my other albums, gave it away. And it was through my great friend, you can catch him on Instagram, hashtag OzNZAcid, who delves into amazing psychedelia and a cornucopia of delights. He was at Egg Records in Sydney, and he was buying the repress, which is that one up there. Of course, that's not an actual repress. That's a poster of the repress, but I think you know what I'm talking about. And he took it to the counter, that one, and the guy looked at me and said, I don't think you want the repress, I think you want the original. And he pulled this out. Now, the thing about it is, when you go to a counter and somebody says, I think you really need this one, what you're really being told is you're about to spend an awful lot of money for something which you may or may not want. It's not in great condition in terms of the cover, but it plays VG Plus near mint. It's fantastic. But that reminds me, I must tell you the story of when I got the poster. I was down at a record shop in Melbourne one day, and I was looking through, and I didn't find anything I wanted to buy. I think I was only buying CDs at that point. And there was the poster of the Church. up on the wall. And the guy wanted $120 for it. So I thought I'd be cool and go up to the counter and said, is there any movement on the price there? Can we go down to 100? And he goes, yeah, there's some movement. How about 140? And I said, well, was it 120? And he goes, well, it's 140 now. And I said, I can't justify that. And he said, well, feel free to pop into the shop and look at it on the wall anytime you want. Great line. So I went out to the car and I was steaming and I was about to drive away when I turned off the car, turned off the ignition, went back into the shop and I said, what about 120? And he goes, you can have it. And so that's how I got this this poster. So that's the Of Skins and Hearts album. But wait, there's more. Because at this time, we've got more evidence of the bridge going from the Church Mark I to Mark II. And it's the Too Fast For You, Tear It All Away double A-side single. Got lots of delights on here. But really importantly, as you can see from the back cover, it has two drummers playing on it. No, in fact, there's only Richard there because Nick doesn't get a Guernsey. But there are two drummers playing on this. And we have You've Got to Go and Fraulein, which Nick's playing on. But then the three songs, Too Fast For You, Sisters and Tear It Away, which Richard is playing on because he has now joined the band. And these are some of the great songs. Too Fast For You is a wonderful jingle jangle pop song. And it shows what's happened now when the Church has delved a little bit further back and gone really into their 1960s roots and got that Beatles feeling, that Birds Beatles feeling, and that influence there. And this is pure psych power pop. And listen to Richard Plug thump those floor toms. It's absolutely wonderful. So the colour palette's getting wider here. And this moves us on to Sisters. Sisters is a gorgeous song, which I remember seeing many times back in the day. And it was a song that had the tendency to be lost in a live performance because A, it's a quieter song, but B, it must be incredibly difficult to actually perform. Steve's got to remember so many lyrics, and there's no room to take a breath. And then it goes into a key change as well, which I'm not a huge fan of key changes in music. I mean, I'll turn the other way when Jim Morrison's doing it with the Changeling off the LA Woman album, but after that, I'm not a huge fan. Still, this is a prime slice of pure pop, ethereal bliss perfection. And it's really a time when the Cocteau Twins remind me of the Church, not the other way around, when the Cocteau Twins remind me of a church. And the last song that I want to talk about is probably my contender for my favourite song on this album. Is This Where You Live is on Of Skins and Hearts. But Tear It All Away is just takes me off to other places. In fact, in about 2008, it took me off to Egypt, and I was roaming around the temple of Queen Hatshepsut. I hope I said that semi-close to correct. And the song came on my iPod, and I whipped out my video camera and started taking footage all around the temple for the proposed idea of creating a film clip of To Tear It All Away, which I never did. Let me know if you'd like me to do it, and I'll put it together sometime. But this was a moment of pure transcendence for me, and I think I must have played it like 15 times in a row. And it has a yearning, majestic quality that maybe is unique for me amongst all of the Church's songs. But that was the end of the Church Mark I. Very soon, as we saw in my previous video, they go on to Mark II, which was with the Blurred Crusade. And that band there, to me, sounds almost as different as Mark I as Mark II does to the band that's currently putting out the Hypnagogue and Erosita, which I can't wait to get my hands on. I think it's released today, in fact. Anyway, thanks very much for coming to the Institute of Pop again. Leave a comment below if you've got your favourites. I'd love to hear what they are. And I look forward to speaking with you next time. And I'm going to be delving into the Clouds Retroactive box set because they've got a tour coming up in support of it. And I can't wait to see them for what would only be my second time to see one of my very favourite bands in the world. And speaking of favourites, remember that if you get pleasure out of music, then who am I to judge your opinion? So I'll see you next time. Thanks very much. It's been a blast. Stay safe.